Most of you know that I try to avoid talking about political issues, especially on Yom Kippur. A number of years back, I spoke of a rabbi of a similar bent who used to joke that if he ever gave a sermon advocating a two-China policy, it would be about using one set for meat meals and one for dairy. But this year, I'm too worried about Israel not to talk about it again. Those staple Yom Kippur topics of sin and forgiveness, issues of love and loss will always be around. But I'm seriously concerned about the survival of the state of Israel. Though when you think about it, the survival of Israel is actually not a political issue. It is as central to the well-being of Judaism today as anything I can think of. And for what I have to say this evening, I expect and want neither applause nor boos, though I'd be happy to engage in dialogue with any of you following the holiday. The danger to Israel's survival comes from three directions. The most extreme is the prospect of another military attack or invasion like the one that took place on October 7th, 2 years ago. Possibly this time with the coordination of all the Iran proxies and the involvement of a nuclear Iran. We have no choice but to trust the Israel Defense Forces to handle that. The next worrisome level is the international effort to discredit Israel's image, to isolate it, and to make the case that the world would be a better and more peaceful place without it. I will readily admit that the present Israeli government has at times acted in a way that damages Israel's reputation among the society of nations. So that while Israel has been mostly successful on the battlefield in the last 2 years, it is clearly lost in the realm of public opinion, to the extent that the Palestinian cause has garnered widespread appeal following the attack of October 7th, and Israel has become somewhat of a pariah state. I don't believe that Hamas should be rewarded for their desire to destroy Israel and kill Jews. And fortunately, many Americans don't buy it either. But a lot of Europeans, and now more Americans, do. How painful it is to see well-meaning people boycotting Israeli institutions and calling Israel a genocidal state. A number of years back, I was sent as a representative of the Rabbinical Assembly to a Presbyterian conference on the Middle East situation. They have a standing committee on the legitimate rights of the Palestinians, and I have no problem with that. But why wouldn't they have a parallel committee on the legitimate right of Israel to live in peace and security? Why wouldn't they support the only country in the Middle East that guarantees equal rights to gays? Isn't that a Presbyterian issue? Why wouldn't they support a country that grants equality to women in its confrontation with societies that don't? Isn't that a Presbyterian cause? But to me, in some ways, the most troubling threat to Israel's survival comes not from Iran and not from the anti-Zionist critics, but from the erosion of support for Israel on the part of American Jews, particularly young American Jews. Israel will survive without Presbyterian or French support. I'm not so confident in its ability to survive if American Jews, and therefore Americans, are not united behind it. And because I'm a rabbi and not an expert on politics or international relations, it's not Israeli policy that I would want to talk about tonight, but American Jewish attitudes about Israel, not because I want to, but because I feel I have to. When it comes to Israel, there's a significant generation gap between older and younger Jews. Young people, if they talk about Israel, speak in terms of them rather than us. They may put Israel in the same category as corrupt militaristic governments that our government insists on supporting. The only Israel they know is a militarily dominating, occupying power. I spoke on Rosh Hashanah about the moral issues and humanitarian concerns that Israel must confront in itself during the war in Gaza. Criticize Israel's policies all you want, but don't call into question its right to defend itself against an enemy openly dedicated to its destruction. To criticize specific Israeli policies in the light of Jewish values is more than permissible. I think it is a Jewish obligation. By God, feed the hungry children and people of Gaza, even though it may be unprecedented to aid your enemy in war. Control the renegade rampaging settlers on the West Bank. Reach out to moderate Arab states in the region to build bridges of peace. I'm critical of a lot of things Israel does. I think that for coalition considerations, it gives far too much power to the fringe right wing and the ultra-Orthodox. I think 77 years of living under siege, worried about rhetoric and attacks from abroad, and terrorism from within, has contributed to the coarsening of Israeli society, inevitably affecting how they see their Arab neighbors. And yes, I believe that the Palestinians should, in theory, have their own separate state. And so did the overwhelming majority of Israelis, at least until October 7th. But the decency of a society is measured not by its perfection in all aspects, but by the existence of a core of citizens who will call it to account when it falls short of perfection. There's a remarkable passage in the Midrash about the story in the book of Exodus, where Pharaoh's daughter goes down to bathe in the Nile and finds the baby Moses. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asks, what is Pharaoh's daughter doing going to bathe in the Nile? Granted, they don't have indoor plumbing in the palace, but Pharaoh's daughter has an army of maidservants to go down and bring up the water and draw her a bath. His answer was, she was doing it to cleanse herself of the shame of being Pharaoh's daughter. She knew that what her father was doing to the Hebrew slaves was wrong and wanted to disassociate herself from it. There are people in Israel who take issue with their government's policies, and they are not just writing opinion pieces in the New York Times or in Haaretz. They are out in the streets by the hundreds of thousands, week after week, for years now. There are Israeli reserve soldiers who have served several tours of duty in the last 2 years that would rather be home with their families and doing their jobs, and they speak out against how they feel the war might be being conducted. But where are the Palestinian equivalents of Pharaoh's daughter? That their leaders are corrupt and venal, you can say that about the leaders of a lot of countries. But where are the decent people to protest it and disassociate themselves from it? They either agree or are too scared or have been systematically killed off by Hamas. I think it's a miracle that Israel has been able to do what they have done in social policy, in immigration absorption, in high-tech creativity, given what they've had to live with. I believe a democracy should be entitled to make mistakes without having its right to exist called into question. And I believe that the more confident the citizens of Israel are that we have their backs, that they have the support of the American Jewish community, the readier they will be to stand up for what is right and take risks for peace. Let me remind you of why Israel continues to be important to us, and what an extraordinary miracle it is that our generation, through no merit of our own, has been granted the privilege of living in the age of Israel restored. It's not just that a lot of Jews live there. As I've said before, a lot of Jews live in South Florida. But when we read that global warming might leave all of southern Florida underwater, it never occurs to us that the survival of the Jewish people is tied up into what happens there. For one thing, Israel is the symbol of the fact that we are a people and not only a theological system. If Judaism were only a religion, it wouldn't need a country. A shelf of books would be enough. So the Methodists ask, why do you need a Jewish state? We don't have a Methodist state. But if you were to ask them, what is the status of a Methodist who doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in Jesus, they wouldn't understand the question. There can't be such a person. He wouldn't be, or she wouldn't be, a Methodist. That's the definition of a Methodist, to believe in those things. But it's precisely because we are a people and not just a faith that makes it possible for a Jew who is not sure he believes in God or in the revelation at Sinai, nevertheless, to be a Jew. That's what gives a lot of you here this evening the right to think of yourselves as Jews, to feel comfortable in synagogue, irrespective of what you may or may not believe. When we're trying to get a minyan, and there are 9 of us present, and it's getting late, and the door opens, and a 10th man or woman walks in, we don't ask that person, do you believe Moses wrote the Torah? How many sets of dishes do you have at home? The fact that a Jew is willing to give of his or her time so that their neighbor can say Kaddish is all the theology that we need. And the fact that so many of you, whatever you do or don't do during the year, whatever you eat or don't eat during the year, the fact that you want to be here with us today is all the theology we ask for. That's what it means to be a people, not just a belief system. And Israel, where Judaism shapes not only the synagogue services, but the calendar, the language, the television programs, Israel is the great enduring symbol of that truth. The safety and security of Israel represents an ongoing referendum on the world's recognizing the right of Jews to live as Jews. Israel is not compensation for what our people endured in the Holocaust. Israel represents the return to the land where our people was born and grew up, the land where we wrote the Bible and taught the world about God. And the acceptance of Israel among the nations of the world is the world's rejection of Hitler and the Hitler doctrine. And what was the essence of that doctrine? The pernicious notion that the world would be better off without Jews. When Hamas and Hezbollah called for the destruction of Israel, when activists called for boycotts of Israeli goods and Israeli speakers, when academics and agitators seek to delegitimize Israel, applying standards of perfection they apply to no other country, and suggest that Jews in essence solved the conflict by agreeing to live as a minority in an Arab-ruled country, they are choosing the idea that the world would be better off without the Jews having their own country, without having to live as a minority and depending on the tolerance of others. And when you and I stand up and defend Israel with all its imperfections, even as we defend our own country despite its imperfections, that is what we are speaking against. That it has to be done some 80 years after the defeat of Hitler is a moral outrage. That we have to do it is a moral obligation. And finally, there is the promise of what Israel can mean for the world. At the beginning of the Zionist movement, some 130 years ago, there were 2 competing visions of what it meant to be a Zionist. There was Theodor Herzl's dream that once the Jews were a normal people in a land of their own, that would be the end of anti-Semitism. We would be a nation like all other nations. There is a story that when the great Hebrew poet Bialik heard that a man had been arrested for trying to rob a bank in Tel Aviv, he recited the blessing Shehechianu, thanking God that the Jews had finally become a normal people like everybody else. And then there was the opposite vision of Zionist leaders who came from a more traditional background than Herzl did. Their dream was that when the Jews returned to their own land, they would finally be able to fulfill the mission to which God had summoned them, not to be an ordinary people, but to be an exemplary people, a light unto the nations, a people who would teach the world by example what does it look to live by God's will, because if it didn't happen there, where would it ever happen? The American Jewish community has been an incredibly productive one in the years since World War II left us as the largest, most prosperous Jewish community in the world. We have established colleges and rabbinical schools. We have written books. We have created new rituals and forms of worship. But the American Jewish community, for all of its dedication and creativity, will always be a hybrid, a blend of Jewish and American values. It will always be Judaism with a strong American accent, a religion for Jews whose first language will remain English. American Judaism will inevitably be a compromise, Judaism enriched, but also diluted by the American environment. Only in Israel can a pure, uncompromised way of life rooted in Jewish values have a chance of emerging. A vulnerable Israel needs the support of the United States government. We American Jews are just 2% of the American population. Alone, we can't determine American foreign policy. But if we are united, if we are well-informed, if we are outspoken, we can move a lot of non-Jewish Americans, people who appreciate courage and decency, to join our cause. Should America's leaders ever get the idea that we are divided, that we are not sure about the rightness of Israel's cause, or that Israel is not all that vital to us, we risk removing one of the key safeguards to Israel's survival. I worry about Israel. I worry about the safety of the millions of our fellow Jews who live there, about the institutions they have built, about the holy places they protect. I worry about the American Jewish community that has been galvanized and filled with pride by Israel, and what it would do to us if, God forbid, something were to happen to Israel. And I worry about the world, about the message that Israel potentially brings to the world, a message I think that the world needs to hear. The first time our people settled in the land to which God led them, we gave the world the Bible, the Psalms, the prophets, the idea of a God who demanded moral behavior and not the bribery of animal sacrifices. The second time our people came back to the land, they taught the world that prayer and study were the most authentic ways of connecting to God. They gave humanity the messianic hope, the vision that the world need not always be as imperfect, as disappointing as it is today. And it is in our lifetime that our people have come back once again to its ancestral home. Israel is the land where Judaism was born almost 4 millennia ago, when Abraham and Sarah began their journey. Judaism gave rise in turn to Christianity and Islam. Today, there are 120 countries in which the majority of the population is Christian. There are 57 member states of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. There is only one Jewish state, a tiny country, 1/4 of 1% of the landmass of the Arab world. Israel has done extraordinary things. It has absorbed immigrants from 103 countries, speaking 82 languages. It has turned a desolate landscape into a place of forests and fields. It has developed cutting-edge agriculture and medical techniques and created one of the world's most advanced high-tech economies. It has produced great poets and novelists, artists and sculptors, symphony orchestras, universities, and research institutes. It has presided over the rebirth of the great Talmudic academies destroyed in Eastern Europe during the Holocaust. Wherever in the world there is a humanitarian disaster, Israel, if permitted, is one of the first to send aid. It has shared its technology with developing countries. Under immense strain, it has sustained democracy, a free press, and an independent judiciary. Who knows what more gifts it stands ready to share with the world? What kind of a society might a state founded on Jewish values and not forced to spend half of its resources on defending itself create as a gift to the world? A day will come when the story of Israel in modern times will speak not just to Jews, but to all who believe in the power of the human spirit as it reaches out to God. as an everlasting symbol of the victory of life over death, hope over despair. It has taken an ancient language, the Hebrew of the Bible, and made it speak again. It has taken the West's oldest faith and made it young again. It has taken the shattered people and made it live again. And we, you and I, have been given the sacred task of protecting the Jewish state and the Jewish homeland, challenging its policies when we have reason to, but never questioning its right to exist and to defend itself. For Israel's sake, for the Jewish people's sake, for the world's sake, that a once-in-a-millennium opportunity to change the world for the better not fall victim to hatred, may we pledge ourselves to do all that we can in the coming year to bequeath a safe, secure, democratic, creatively Jewish Israel to our children, to our grandchildren, and to a world that so desperately needs it. Shana Tova Tikatevu. May the entire people of Israel be inscribed for a good, prosperous, and peaceful year to come. Amen.